in case I have accidentally framed this in a very individualistic way,
Sure.
you do believe that things, that communities can act upon us to help us frame and structure meaning and not just make us, self-realized. Oh, look, I made a set of, I made my life so meaningful. Look at me. And the more meaningful I become, the more interesting I become.
Look how good I am.
And then and then we evolve always toward the sun. And we don't. We sometimes grow in the wrong direction. And you're
that's really true. I mean, I think that we don't know how to do community very well anymore. We think we do, but we really don't. And it's vital. It's vital to our sense of, well, so many things, but safety. But when we're talking about enchantment, I think that magic can only be woven between people, because otherwise it dissipates so fast. And you need other people to hold it for you in the moments when it's floating away for you, and you can anchor it other times. But there's so much beauty in complexity, and communities are complex, and they put us in the way of complex people with complex views. And we very swiftly unlearn how to deal with that, and how to deal with disagreement and clashes of personality and all of that kind of thing. And I freely say that I'm not someone that has the answers for how we get back into community properly and back into congregation. Because one of the things that congregations do that we don't do in any other part of life is they have to welcome all sorts of different people. They have to be non-exclusive. And I don't think people like me who live in a pretty secular world have ever had to solve that problem. Because we've trusted congregations to be doing it elsewhere. And it's a really important one for us to solve, because that means us shifting away from our I don't like that person, I don't I don't agree with them, so I don't want to be with them. That's problematic, honestly.
My friend Sam Wells is the pastor, using more Anglican words. Vicar, reaching for
Vicar,
it.
Yeah, we just have vicars.
Great. Learning on the spot. He has a clerical collar. He at
Vicar.
St. Martin in the Fields.
Oh, yeah.
And he's a delight. And he was talking about yesterday about the difference between associations and institutions. And with these associations, like bird watching, that you can develop this very deep but selective way of then communicating, and it could be decades long, but you don't necessarily talk about your
feelings,
spouse because you're actually doing this other thing, and it can be a really rich, incredible place. But an institution, and we might just use the church as an example, but has a very wide, a much wider, and then sometimes, like depending on how people, there are fewer entryways to get in, but then sometimes then fewer ways in which people know how to connect unless they
fewer entries to get in, but fewer exits out in many ways.
Yes, that's exactly right.
Harder for it to reject you, I think.
So he was trying to help me think about like different versions of believing and belonging, and since that's such a powerful, I think I'm so
interested in that, and I have so little understanding of it really, but I think it's interesting to compare the US and the UK and church going in that sense as well, because where I come from, you attend the church that's near your house. I mean, there are just churches everywhere, and they're all basically,
look, it's right there.
That's it. You go to your closest church, and so I know the vicar of my local church. She's lovely, and I go sometimes with my son because he goes to school there, and not in the church, but next door to the church. And I'm part of that community just by dint of living nearby. There's no, I don't think we often think about choice so much
as a personality test, but in the States, and it can be association, institution become the same thing, in which we know that you're a bird watcher because you go.
That's right. Yeah. And
Church
you choose
of the
your denomination much more strongly.
And then you accidentally get stuck in these smaller and smaller. One of the big hopes I ever have, I teach at a divinity school, which has been very big tent, and it's one of the last big tent experiments denominationally that is still being attempted because so many others collapsed, and it's been really bumpy. But it creates always a sense of awe in me for anybody to try to be bigger than their preferences.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I mean, I'd love to work more in this area, but I think how do we make that tent even bigger is one of the big questions. Yes, because I mean, obviously, God, this is going to get very boring for your listeners, but you know, in the UK, we have all this conflict about the Church of England and its attitude to gay people at the moment, and I think a lot of us had assumed it was a bigger tent than it turns out to have been. Yeah. And there's a huge sense of disappointment about that, because people actually really want that umbrella to stretch over so many different people, and they don't want to fragment. But not fragmenting now means inviting a bigger group in. Yes. It's not the same group anymore. Yeah. And because we have an established church, there's this sort of expectation that it will grow with us. And of course it doesn't necessarily. And that it will, that it will agree with everything that mainstream society agrees with. Yes, and we seem to have kind of hit a little limit there. But that, I mean, the big difference is that, I can talk about someone who feels like I'm part of Church of England, even though I'm not a Christian. That's the British thing, that I have always grown up with the church and feel very comfortable in it and feel at home there and don't feel any conflict to sort of being part of that congregation when I choose to go. Yeah. But that doesn't make me a very good congregation member. And I so admire the people that stick with those places when they feel rejected by them and dig in and say, I'm going to make you hear me. Like, that's an incredible thing to do, and it's something I don't know how to do, I don't think.
I think that feeling of not being a lifer but not feeling like a lifer, and being part of multiple kinds of belonging now is so much more common than our institutions imagine when they do annual surveys of who's doing what. Yeah. So trying to figure out your deep interest in what makes us belong to ourselves, what makes us belong once again to the world around us, and then we hope to each other. Yeah. Sounds like it is the thing that is like constantly creating like tendrils that will wrap around things.
It's
and
so interesting, and I love finding the problem. Yes. Like, I love finding the bit I don't know how to do, and I am figuring out how to solve it. That's the best bit.
You remind me so much of there's this my friend Barbara Brown Taylor has this deep and abiding love of making the world feel like reality has layers to it again. And she wrote this gorgeous book called Alter in the World, and it reminded me of you. She said, Earth is so thick with divine possibility that it's a wonder we can walk anywhere without cracking our shins on altars.
That's so true. That's so true. How do we not notice? How do we not notice all this amazing depth of experience that's everywhere all the time?
You, my dear, are a delight.
Thank you
so much for doing this with me.
It's been really fun. Thank you. I could have talked about that for hours. Sorry.
I would be interested for hours.
We could have figured it out if we'd have got enough time.